Hi, welcome to Sewing with Sandy. Today we're going to do McCall's 8557. McCall's 8557. How cute is this, right? Tie front, puffy sleeves, long peplum. This fabric, this eyelet fabric is from Minerva. I'm an ambassador for them and they sent me this fabric and I just love it. Now it is a knit, it's a little stretchy, and this pattern's made for a woven. So I sized down one size. You know, check your measurements. It's loose fitting. I don't have it with a lot of negative ease. So that's one thing to consider, but if you make it with a cotton, or it'll be adorable. It has these puffy sleeves with a little bit of elastic, which I love, and darts, peplum, and the tie front. Now I did make a couple of changes and I have a couple of comments about the pattern. One of them is that the side seams of the peplum and the side seam of the blouse don't line up. That drives me crazy, and I will show you how to fix that. Since this is an eyelet, I did not put a facing in it because A, I don't like facings, they drive me crazy, but B, I didn't want the doubleness of the eyelet right underneath, so you could definitely see how dark that would be with 2 layers of fabric. So I just folded it in and did a little bias neckline. But if you're gonna do a cotton, you'd need a facing. This is okay because it's soft and there's no interfacing in there, but with a cotton, you would want that interfaced and have a little stiffness. Since it is a knit, I can pull it over my head. So I pre-tied all of these bows because they're just so messy looking and you have to spend quite a bit of time tying them. So I pre-tied them. I sewed the little knot. I just ran a stitch through the little knot and I stitched the back of the bow to the shirt so they don't look floppy and they look more neat and uniform. I mean, I have several blouses that you have to tie them. It takes a while to tie them. They never look right. They're always kind of cattywampus. So this way they all look nice and neat because there's a lot going on. The other thing that I did with this, if it is a cotton and you want to pre-tie these and stitch them down, then you can put a little invisible placket zip underneath the arm and you can get in and out of it that way because you're gonna need some room to make it move so you can get it over your head. But outside of that, it's super cute. I love the puff sleeves. There's a lot of gathering. There's gathering. You have to insert the elastic here. There's gathering on the sleeves and gathering on the peplum. The thing about the sleeve gathering is it's forgiving, right? Because you can have little pleats up here. You're supposed to have little tucks up here. So if you're a novice and you've never put sleeves in, an inset sleeve, this would be a good one to try. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is make the dart. We have piece 1. Here's my dart. My fabric, the right side is on the inside of my fold, and I have pinned it because this fabric is the same on both sides and I want them to be the same all the way around. So I'm going to mark my dart. And what I like to do, I mean, you can use chalk if you want. I put a pin in the pattern pieces where the dart circles are, and then lift up the tissue and replace those pins with another pin because I have to take the tissue away, right? And then get this one in the center. All right, so now I can remove the tissue. Now this top piece is marked, and if I flip everything over, I just put a pin where the first pins from the other side are coming out. Now I can separate my pieces and my darts are marked on the wrong side of my fabric. And then it's just a matter of matching up my pins where they're going into the fabric. And because this fabric is holey, it's a little difficult. But now I have my dart and I start to stitch. Here you stitch off, way off, and then just come on barely thin and all the way to where you need to be. If your fabric is bouncy, or if you're not entirely sure, you can press this while it's pinned like this and draw a chalk line if that makes you more comfortable. Then we're gonna press the dart down towards the bottom of the garment. And then after that, we're gonna sew the shoulder seams and the side seams together. All right, here's my little top. I have my darts sewn in, pressed down, and then I sewed the side seams and the shoulder seams, so I have like the beginnings of a little shirt. Now normally I would overlock these seams, but because I don't want to put this color thread in my overlocker and I have white and you can see through this, I opted to use a step zigzag on that. And then I trimmed the seam down to the step zigzag. So it's that zigzag goes. So only because it'll hold the seams together and it'll look neat, for no other reason. And then I compress them all to the back and they look nice and neat because we have those little dots there. And if I leave the wider 5/8 inch seam allowance, you will see them. Now on the sleeves, I did leave them. So the next step is to take the sleeve, and you want to make sure, one of the things that's important in the sleeve is the center, the top center. This goes on the shoulder seam. This dot, you need to make sure that that's marked. And you also need to know which side is the back. This sleeve is not symmetrical. If you fold the tissue in half, you can see that the dot isn't in the center, and then the back is wider, it's higher than the front. So you want to make sure that you get that correct when you're marking it. I use pins, but you could use chalk. I would not cut into the seam, but in this case you might be able to because you're going to trim it. I'm going to have the same technique with the sleeves because I want it to look nice and neat. And then you want to run a basting stitch, the longest stitch on your machine, from where the dots are, the marks, right? You want to run the stitch from here all the way around to here. And you want to run 2 rows of that. I like to run one inside the seam allowance and then outside the seam allowance. That way I can rip it out when I'm done. And you want to make sure you leave long thread tails so you can pull it because you're going to gather that up. It's a very puffy sleeve. After you've done that, you're going to sew the sleeve right sides together along the sleeve seam, and I pressed this open because we're going to make a little casing for the elastic to go around the bottom because it is gathered at the bottom. So here on this edge, you want to just baste down this seam, and that will help when you're threading the elastic casing through. So I'm going to go baste that down, and then I'm also going to finish the sleeve. So I'm going to turn up a 1/4 of an inch and then make a casing for my elastic and stitch this, but I'm going to leave a spot open to thread my elastic through. Now it calls for 3/8 inch elastic. I didn't have that. I have 1 inch, so I want to make sure that my casing is wide enough to hold the 1 inch elastic. So I'm going to go do that on both of my sleeves, and then we'll be ready to put those in. How cute is this little puff sleeve? All right, let's talk about how we got there. We finished our elastic so that the bottom is all done. And before we pull these threads, we want to make sure that we know where the center is, the center of the top of the sleeve, because that's going to match up to our shoulder seam. And then this bottom seam here is going to match up to the underseam. Now I like to lay my pieces out flat, looking at me the way they're going to be, because I want to make sure that I have the back of the sleeve to the back of the garment. And I want to match this pin to the shoulder seam, and I want to sew with the shoulder seam up and this part, the sleeve, down at my feed dogs. So I'm going to match these two, the pin and this shoulder seam together. Kind of flip everything around. These little holes get caught on everything. So I'm going to start with this pin at the shoulder seam. Then I'm going to go down to the side seam, which is pressed to the back, and my sleeve seam, which is here somewhere, which is pressed open. And I'm going to line up those seams and pin that. Now, the under part of your arm, from the seam to where you started the basting stitches, is 1-to-1. We don't need extra volume under our arms. That would just make it really uncomfortable. So I like to pin one side, and then I go back and I pin up the other side. And I try to keep these threads on the side that they belong, the basting thread tails there. All right, now that that's pinned, I can take my basting threads, and I want to take one from each of the same side, but one from the top basting row and one from the bottom basting row, and just gather them until they fit that part of the arm opening. And this is a really puffy sleeve, so there's quite a bit of gathering involved. And then once it's the same size, then we're just going to spread out those gathers so they're even across the sleeve. I need a few more. Okay, so that's the same size, and I just want to make these gathers even. And I'm going to pin that. Make sure you get all the way up to the top. These sleeves are easy to put in because they're supposed to be gathered, so puckers and pleats are like acceptable, right? So we're gonna pin that so it's all nice and even. And we'll do that to both the front side and the back of the sleeve. And then if you're at all nervous, baste it. Use your basting stitch. And then when you take it out, take a look at it. Make sure that you don't want any folds in it, right? You don't want the fabric literally pleated over. You just want a nice gathering all the way around. Then you can pull out the basting threads when you're happy. And what I'm going to do is the same thing I did with the side seams. I'm going to zigzag this. I'm going to use that step zigzag to keep these seams together, and then press them towards the sleeve because that helps the sleeve cap. And that's it for the sleeves. Those are done. They're so cute, so cute. So the next thing we have to contend with is the ruffle. So we're going to take piece 4, which is the center, and we cut one on the fold. So we're going to open that up. Right side's out, and then piece 3, which are the sides. And on the piece it says gather and hem. So I'm putting the gather sides towards me, and we're going to put these, this is the right side, whoop. So it makes one big long ruffle. So we want to sew these side seams, these ruffle side seams. All right, so I'm going to sew this together so I have one big long ruffle. I'm going to gather, just like I did with the sleeves, 2 rows of stitching across this gather section up here so I can make a ruffle, make this into a ruffle. Okay, here's our nice long ruffle, and I broke, because it's so long, I did the basting stitches, both rows, from the edge to the seam, and then I broke them, right? So I have separate sections of basting stitches instead of one huge basting stitch. Then along the back piece, again, broke the stitches, and then so there's 3 separate sections of double rows of basting stitches. That just gives me a little bit more flexibility when I'm pulling. I'm not pulling all the way from this left end all the way down to the other side. It just makes it a lot easier to work with. Now the next thing we want to do is balance this long piece around the bottom of our garment. So the first thing you want to do is you want to find the center back of the ruffle or the peplum. So I'm putting the 2 side seams together, and I have my center back, which I marked with a little pin. And then for the bodice piece, same thing, you want to find the center back. So you put the 2 side seams together of your bodice piece, and that will help you find the center back, and you put a little pin in there, so you're going to line those up. All right. So this is all face up, just the way I'm going to look at it when it's finished. The other thing that you need to do is on your back tissue piece, there's dots here for each size. You want to find your size dot Now you can lay this down. We know this is the center back because we put a pin in there, and just lay this across. And I'm gonna put a pin where my size is, because that's where my side seam is going to end up from this. They don't line up to the side seams on the blouse, which seems odd to me, but that's the way it's done. So that's what we're gonna do. That's what the directions say. So now my blouse is face up, my peplum is face up, the gathering is right here at this edge, and I'm going to put them right sides together. I'm gonna start by matching my center back seam. And then I'm going to match the peplum seam to this pin where that dot was. And then I'm going to match the edge of my peplum to the front edge of my top. And I'm going to do that on the other side. And then I'm just going to start gathering these basting stitches to fit each of these sections. And by doing it in sections and matching up the dots, you have a more balanced based. Where's my other stitch here? The other thing you want to do is make sure that you don't need your basting stitches all the way out at the end. You can start at 5/8 of an inch in the seam allowance. You don't need gathering in the seam allowance. So that will help you to not get it stuck in your machine, and then, you know, the edge where it gets jammed down in there, and also you just don't need it there. So then we're just going to pull this gathering on the peplum for each section. There's a lot of gathering in this. And we want to pin this from the blouse side. To sew it, we want the gathering down there. And if you're afraid that you're going to pull the basting stitches out on the other edge, just tie a little knot in them. So that's pretty close. It's actually too small, so I'm just going to fluff these out so this section looks nice and balanced, and pin it up and move on to the other sections. Then I'm going to stitch this, and again, if you're nervous, baste it. I'm going to stitch it, make sure it's okay, then I'm going to pull all my basting stitches out. All right, here's the peplum all sewed on, and you can see that this is the side seam of the top, and then this is the side seam of the peplum. I don't know why they don't line up. I don't know why they cut the pattern that way. That is really weird to me. I would like to see this seam go down here. So if I was going to make this again, I would take this much of the peplum tissue and cut it off and tape it to this one. And then I would have this full seam going down the side, because it's just a little weird and it falls a little weird, but so be it. That's the way the pattern is, and that's what we're doing. We're going through the pattern as it is the first time. All right, so here are my side seams. This is my peplum. This is the side seam, and this is the peplum side seam. These two seams should be together. It drives me crazy. And so I'm going to show you how to fix that. I want to make this back peplum piece longer and the front peplum piece shorter. And it measures 4.5 from seam to seam. So we're going to say 5 inches because there's some gathering in here. So I'm going to show you how to fix the tissue. This is piece 3. This is my front piece, and I'm going to shorten this by 5 inches. And this is piece 4. This is my back piece, and I want to lengthen this by 5 inches. So I'm going to measure, and it doesn't matter what size you are. We're just changing the 5 inches, right? The seam allowances stay the same and everything. So I'm going to measure 5 inches on my tissue. Just going to fold it. Get a little crease in there. Fold it up. 5 inches. And, you know, you don't have to be perfect on this because there's gatherings, right? You know, so the gathering can give you a little forgiveness. And I'm going to cut this tape it to my back piece. Now, your seam allowances haven't changed. Even though the markings have moved over here, your seam allowances are still your seam allowances. They're just not marked on that piece now. So it might look a little funny, but we haven't changed the size of the peplum the total size. We've just changed the size of the center back piece and the front piece. So now when I sew this seam up, which is now my new side seam for the peplum, it will match the side seam on my blouse. That will make me very happy. If it doesn't bother you, then you can skip this step. But I will make this blouse again. I really like the blouse. I just want it to look right. And the next thing we're going to do is the ties. And I've done them up, but I'm going to show you. They want you to, this is just a scrap piece just for demonstration purposes, but they want you to fold them right sides together, stitch across the bottom, stitch up and turn them around. So much work. For me, I just couldn't be bothered doing that much work. So I take it to the iron, and you want to fold down one edge. And if your fabric, like this knit, is a little bouncy, you can just put pins in here and hit it with the steamer, all right? And then you're gonna fold it in half. And again, hit it with the steamer. Open it up, and then these edges are gonna go to that seam line in the middle. And pins work. If you need pins, pin it in before you hit it with your iron, and then fold it together. So now it's all completely encased, and what you have is something that looks like this. So I have one raw edge, and I just stitched down one side, and I like to stitch down the side that has those, the two edges coming together first, because sometimes when you stitch this, you don't catch those pieces in, and it's just so much easier. So I stitched all the way down across the finished edge and then back up the top again, and my ties are done and they look great. Turning them takes forever. It's an awful lot of work. So if you want to go ahead, I mean, this is totally up to you. The next thing you're going to do is take your tissue. This is the front here. And I'm going to, if you haven't marked these, and I don't usually mark stuff until I'm ready to do it, I'm going to overlay my tissue, and the large circles, the large dots on the tissue, I'm going to mark them. So there's 4 marks. Mark them with a pin so I know where my ties are going to go. So there's 4 on the tissue on the top piece, and then there is 1 on the peplum. Just make sure you have it right side up. And you're going to sew the section of the tie that is raw to these marks. So you're going to open it up this way, and you're going to sew them away from the seam allowance, because when you sew this seam allowance, you'll have this really nice finish on your tie, right? So we're going to pin all of these down. And when you sew them on here, because you're going to stitch them before you actually put the facing on, you want to stitch them really close to where the seam allowance is. You don't want to sew them down here. You want to sew them like so this is a 5/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to sew them at a 1/2 inch, because I don't want them to twist when I'm sewing the facing on. All right, now I've done the other side. I've already stitched them on. And you can see that I sewed them at like a 1/2 inch. So when I go back and I can't see them because they'll be between the shirt and the facing, they won't end up crooked like this, and then you have to pick them out. So that's not a lot of fun. After you sew one side, because I'm crazy about making sure everything lines up, I'm going to match up the second side and make sure that I have them aligned, because I don't want to get it all finished and then find out my neck edge is like cattywampus, or the hem is cattywampus. So I'm going to line this one up, and before I sew this second one, I'm just going to make sure that my ties line up with each other. So this lines up well, and this one lines up really well, This one is a little bit off, so I'm just going to move it, even though it's not, you know, the dot may be different. I'm going to move it so it lines up with the other tie that I've already done. Same thing down here. This one's a little high. So I'm just gonna move it so it aligns with the one that I already have. So I'm gonna stitch those down and we'll come back and talk about facings. All right, here we go. At this point, all we have to do is put the hem on and the facings. Now, I've gone back and forth a couple of times on this because the, first of all, the fabric is a knit and this pattern is made for a woven. So that's one thing, but I just absolutely loved the combination of this fabric with this pattern. And because it's see-through, you know, it's a lacy type of pattern, I don't want my facings to show, right? So my facings would kind of solid this out because there would be 2 layers under here. But normally what you would do, and you all know how I feel about facings, but these would be interfaced and you would sew them together with this neck facing, right? You would sew these together, right sides together, and then you would apply this to the front of the top. And then the hem is like a hem of a jacket. It's a little, this is a little shorter. This is actually a little shorter than your regular hem, and it folds under to make this type of hem finish on the leading edge. I'm not going to do that, partly because facings drive me insane, but partly also because I don't want to see it. So what I've decided to do is just turn this leading edge over on the front and stitch that down. I'm going to do a double row stitching on that. I'm going to put bias binding on the neckline, which I can show you how to do that. I'll put a link to the video for that down below, and then just do a very narrow kind of double folded hem on the bottom. So a couple of final things to think about is that when you tie these, it can be a challenge to get them to look really neat. So with this knit garment, I can tie them, run a stitch through them, and leave them, and they'll always be perfect. So I can take my time, make sure they're tied exactly the way I want them, put a stitch right through the center. So if this was a beautiful tie, and they were all even all the way down, I can just run a stitch right there through the center, even if it's by hand from the back or with the machine, and it will stay put, and I can put this on and off over my head. If it's cotton, you probably can't do that. However, the alternative is, if you like them pre-tied and staying tied, because that's the hardest part of these garments, is you can put a placket zipper in the side seam. You really just need enough space so you can open it up and get your arms into it. So that is an alternative if you like to have your blouses, these tie front blouses, pre-tied. So let's finish this puppy up and see how she looks.